If you study the expression on the Senate Majority Leader's face at this moment, it's not rage you're seeing, it's dread. You're watching someone who realizes he just handed the President of the United States the most devastating update of his entire political life. 10 minutes ago, the gavel fell in Washington. That sound wasn't merely a lost vote. It was the noise of Donald Trump's hold over his own party breaking clean in two. For the past 3 months, the White House has assured everyone that Canada would fold. They insisted the tariffs were inevitable. They declared the Northern Enforcement Act was already sealed. They claimed Mark Carney had run out of options. They were wrong. While Trump kept firing off warnings online, Mark Carney was quietly doing something far more effective. He didn't waste energy arguing with the president. He spoke directly to the president's real employers, the American voters, and even more critically, to the senators who depend on those voters to keep their seats. Tonight, 5 Republicans, 5 longtime allies inside Trump's circle, changed sides. They sank the legislation, they stopped the tariffs, and they delivered Canada its largest diplomatic win since the Second World War. Trump didn't simply lose a roll call today. He lost the ability to scare people into line. Over the next 40 minutes, I'm going to walk you through what happened behind closed doors when the agreement collapsed. We'll examine the confidential red state damage report that Carney's staff placed on senators' desks only hours before the vote. We'll see exactly how the most powerful person on the planet was outplayed by a prime minister who never once raised his voice. You are witnessing a historic pivot happening live. The bully's megaphone just cracked, and the fallout is about to slam into Washington like a runaway locomotive. Let's be very plain about what occurred on the Senate floor, because corporate media outlets are too nervous to describe it accurately. This wasn't a minor scheduling hiccup. This was a rebellion. At 2 p.m. Eastern, the Senate had been set to approve the Secure North Act. That bill was Trump's signature achievement. It would have granted the president sole authority to seal the Canadian border and slap a flat 25% tariff on every product, from Alberta oil to Ontario steel, without ever needing Congress again. Everyone expected a victory celebration. The vote counters were confident. The White House had already chilled the champagne. Then the voting began. First came Senator Collins, then Murkowski. Predictable. They're the predictable holdouts. Trump could absorb a couple of defections, but then the chamber fell quiet. Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota voted no. Senator Deb Fischer of Nebraska voted no. And then came the decisive blow. Senator Todd Young of Indiana, a state Trump carried by a wide margin, stepped forward and cast a clear no. Final result, 48 yes, 52 no. The bill died. Now here's the detail that should chill anyone inside the Trump orbit. These weren't anti-Trump rebels. These were reliable supporters. These were people who stood by him during scandals, during impeachment trials, through every storm. So why the switch? Why right now? Because at 9 a.m. this morning, every Republican senator got a tailored dossier straight from Ottawa. It wasn't spin or talking points. It was a list of casualties. It spelled out precisely how many jobs would disappear in their own districts the instant the bill became law. It named the specific factories in their hometowns that Canada would immediately stop purchasing from. There was no overt threat, just a calm, precise preview of tomorrow. Senator Rounds didn't oppose Trump because he's fond of Canada. He voted no because Carney demonstrated that a trade war would ruin roughly 40% of South Dakota's cattle operations inside half a year. Senator Young didn't change sides because he's progressive. He changed because Indiana builds engines and Canada buys more of them than anyone else. Washington pretended this reality didn't exist. Trump believed he was facing a pushover at the poker table. He thought a big bluff would win. But Carney wasn't at the poker table. He was playing chess. While Trump fixated on the frontier, Carney quietly took his pieces off the board. This is an embarrassment. A president who controls the Senate majority just watched his top foreign policy priority get killed by members of his own team. And the hand holding the blade belongs to Ottawa. You deserve to see the proof. You need to understand how surgically precise this maneuver was, because it rewrites what we think we know about power across North America. Exhibit 1, the pain map. Take a look at this chart. It's a page that leaked from the briefing package Carney's trade team handed out on the Hill. When most nations lobby Washington, they talk about partnership and common ideals. Carney's people never mentioned partnership. They shaded the entire country according to economic vulnerability. The darkest red zones aren't blue strongholds. They're solidly Republican counties, deep Trump voting territory, places that depend on Canadian parts, Canadian energy, Canadian buyers. They mapped the damage straight into the president's electoral heartland. They showed that if Trump launched the attack on Canada, the first casualties would be inside the Republican coalition. Exhibit 2, the governor's joint letter. 3 days ago, a short, blunt message landed at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The press barely touched it. You likely missed it entirely. Signed by the governors of Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, it read in part, "Closing the northern border would halt our auto plants within 2 days. We cannot promise calm in the streets if 300,000 workers lose their paychecks in the same week. That isn't polite diplomacy. That's a direct alert about potential civil disorder." Trump brushed it off. He labeled it cowardice. He told crowds the governors were being manipulated, but the senators who represent those states read every word. They know exactly who writes the campaign checks. They understand that Ford and General Motors don't survive on speeches. They survive on components that roll across the Ambassador Bridge multiple times daily. Exhibit 3, the immediate market response. This is the clearest evidence. Watch what happened to the indexes. The moment the vote failed, the Dow didn't tumble. It surged. It climbed 400 points in under 10 minutes. Why the jump? Because Wall Street had been dreading Trump's plan. For weeks, the largest financial houses in New York had been quietly warning that a trade conflict with Canada would tip the economy into recession. They recognize how deeply the two economies are fused. You can't amputate one without triggering a massive shock. When the no votes were tallied, the markets exhaled in relief. The trading computers understand the facts, even when voters are still sorting them out. The capital is betting that Carney is the responsible one. The capital values predictability more than bravado. Think what that says about your own situation. Your retirement account just gained value because Trump was defeated. That storyline is poisonous for a president who markets himself as the economic genius. Wall Street is wagering against him. Wall Street is wagering on the Canadian Prime Minister. And finally, Exhibit 4, the eerie quiet from big tech. Normally, when a president champions major legislation, you see Silicon Valley executives rushing to endorse it. Musk and the rest usually make noise. Where were they this time? Nowhere. Why? Because Canada supplies the raw materials they can't replace overnight. Last month, Carney made it unmistakable. If the U.S. cuts off Canadian lumber and steel, Ottawa will reassess export approvals for the critical minerals that go into smartphones and electric vehicle batteries. Musk never once mentioned this bill on his platform. That absence roared louder than any statement. It shows Carney had already secured neutrality from the billionaire class before the ballots were cast. So how is the president responding? Precisely the way you would predict. He's losing the storyline, and when he loses the storyline, he strikes out wildly. 10 minutes after the vote, he was on Truth Social in full capital letters, branding the 5 Republican defectors as disloyal, claiming foreign money had purchased them. He's vowing to challenge them in primaries. He's threatening to slash federal support to their states. But this time, the playbook isn't landing. Here's why it's different now. Normally, when Trump warns a fellow Republican, they back down fast. They say sorry, they return to the fold, they show deference. This afternoon, Senator Todd Young released his own statement. He offered no apology. He said plainly, "My responsibility is to safeguard Indiana jobs, not to protect the pride of the executive branch." That's a declaration of war. Trump is caught in a snare he designed himself. His whole identity rests on being the world's toughest negotiator, the man who can force anyone to fold. He told everyone Canada was feeble. He called them moochers. He promised he could crush them with one pen stroke. But when he actually tried to apply pressure, he discovered Canada isn't just another renter in his tower. Canada is part of the load-bearing structure. You can't demolish the base without collapsing the top floor, too. He's reacting, not steering. Watch the briefing from an hour ago. The press secretary stumbled through answers. She couldn't justify why the president's own party turned on him. She tried redirecting toward the Mexico wall. She tried redirecting toward China. The journalists didn't follow. For the first time in years, the sense of untouchability has vanished. Trump appears alone. He looks like someone yelling at the ocean to stop rising. And for an authoritarian-style leader, the worst fate isn't being disliked. It's being dismissed. The Senate dismissed him today. The financial markets dismissed his warnings. And Canada has stopped even bothering to talk to him directly. They're speaking to the people who actually control the levers. This is the White House's worst-case scenario. They wanted a made-for-television showdown they could dominate. Instead, they got a quiet defeat in private offices. They wanted a cage match. They got cross-examination. And Trump struggles when the opponent refuses to seek the spotlight. He thrives on drama. Carney is denying him drama and replacing it with consequences. We have to talk about Mark Carney. Whether you admire him or despise him, you have to acknowledge the skill of what he just executed. This wasn't chance. This was a textbook display of contemporary influence. When Trump targets most international leaders, they usually respond in one of two ways. They swing back and lose in the gutter fight, or they surrender and try flattery. Carney chose neither path. He treated the Trump administration like a severe but temporary storm, something you reinforce the House against, not something you scream at. His approach rested on three foundations. First, the subnational workaround. Carney quit dialing the White House months earlier. He saw the Oval was a dead-end street. Instead, he deployed his cabinet to state capitals. They sat down with governors, with mayors, with labor leaders. They constructed a protective layer of American backing for Canada that exists inside the United States. They made sure that striking Canada would mean striking Wisconsin, striking Pennsylvania, striking Texas. Second, the numbers as ammunition. Carney comes from central banking. He thinks in probabilities and exposure. He didn't dispatch politicians to the Capitol. He sent analysts. He delivered meticulous impact studies to insurers and retirement funds. He turned facts into a weapon. He made it impossible for any senator to plead ignorance. He printed the exact cost of staying loyal to Trump in large type and placed it directly in front of them. Third, deliberate restraint. You've noticed Carney hasn't been on cable news shouting about unfairness. That's intentional. He refused to give Trump the optics of a brawl. By remaining composed, by staying almost dull, he made Trump appear erratic. He made Trump look like the source of chaos. Carney presented Canada not as an adversary, but as the reliable partner. He signaled to everyone, we're the grown-ups here. We're the ones keeping energy moving. We're the ones keeping supply chains intact. And people accepted it because today the United States Senate essentially endorsed that view. This is sovereignty in a new form. It isn't about patriotic displays. It's about becoming so indispensable, so interwoven, and so capable that your counterpart injures himself if he tries to injure you. Carney didn't have to argue for Canada today. The American economy argued for Canada on his behalf. So why does any of this matter to someone watching from Ohio, Florida, or Oregon? Because the underlying rules shifted today. For 7 decades, the default belief was that a U.S. president could act unilaterally and the rest of the planet would simply adapt. We labeled it American exceptionalism. That notion took a serious hit today. We just watched a medium-sized, courteous neighbor reach inside the American system and flip the switch off. That means your fuel costs are no longer determined only in Washington. They're shaped by how skillfully Ottawa navigates the board. Your weekly grocery total is linked to trade arrangements Trump can't simply tear up. Your employment stability depends on an integrated continental system that outweighs any single office holder. This is a moment of clarity. It proves that America First has boundaries. The boundary is arithmetic. The boundary is physics. If you back Trump, this should trouble you. It reveals that his authority is fragile. It shows he can be defeated, not by Democrats, but by economic gravity itself. If you oppose Trump, this is a reminder that checks can still function, but only when external intelligence applies the right force. The widest consequence, though, is for the international system. Politicians in Europe, Asia, Latin America, they're all studying this closely. They just received the playbook. They just learned that you don't have to tremble at the tweet. You don't have to panic at tariff threats. If you're strategic, if you're coordinated, and if you bring hard evidence, you can lock the machinery of the Trump administration. Mark Carney just published a how-to guide for dealing with Donald Trump. You can be certain Beijing, Brussels, and Mexico City are highlighting the relevant pages. What comes next? This isn't finished. A cornered leader is the most unpredictable kind, and Trump is cornered. Option 1, the unilateral decree. He'll attempt to sidestep Congress. He'll proclaim a national emergency along the northern border. He'll try to invoke the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose the tariffs regardless. The difficulty? Losing the Senate vote gutted his legal foundation. If he ends up in court now, Canada can simply point to today's record and say, Congress deliberately refused this. Even a conservative Supreme Court will struggle to override that clear legislative intent. Option 2, targeted retaliation. He may resort to smaller, harassing measures, delaying border traffic, ramping up inspections, manufacturing red tape. That's probable. Brace for longer wait times at crossings next week. Brace for sudden holds on Canadian shipments. It will feel spiteful. It will cost money. But it won't deliver the decisive rupture he wanted. It will mainly irritate the very governors who already broke ranks. Option 3, internal surrender. This is the outlier. If markets continue celebrating Trump's setback, major Republican funders may intervene. They may walk into the West Wing and say no more. They may warn him that the Canada fight is unwinnable. They may push for a course correction. It sounds far-fetched, yet consider the numbers. He just lost 52-48. The unthinkable already occurred. I want you to hold one picture from today in your mind. As senators were leaving the floor, journalists surrounded Senator Murkowski. They asked whether she feared the president's social media attacks. She paused, looked straight into the lens, and answered, I'm not scared of a tweet. I'm scared of looking my state's farmers in the eye and admitting I wrecked their income for no reason. That sentence captures the change. For 4 years, fear of Trump was the only real currency in Washington. Today, fear of concrete consequences finally proved heavier than fear of the man. And on the other side of the border in Ottawa, there was no gloating, no triumphant news conference. Mark Carney was seen walking out of his office late at night, carrying a folder, looking exactly like someone who had just completed a long shift. That difference tells the entire tale. One man raging at a screen, the other man calmly checking columns of figures. The U.S. Senate just pulled the economy back from a sharp drop, but they didn't do it out of generosity. They did it because Canada made them stare over the edge. The partnership survives for now, but the confidence inside it is damaged. Once you know your closest ally was prepared to injure you, you never quite rest the same way again. This wasn't only a legislative defeat, it was the end of an era in how things get done. Trump tried to shatter Canada. Instead, he fractured his own coalition. Do you believe Trump will quietly accept this loss? Or should we expect an executive action that rips up legal norms simply to get even with Carney? I read every single comment. Let me know what you predict comes next. And if you want to stay ahead of Washington and catch Carney's next play before the insiders do, make sure you're subscribed. You're watching the only place that warned this vote would collapse when every other outlet called it a lock. Thanks for staying with me. See you in the next one.